We're 2 days away from the 150th running of the Preakness Stakes, a big milestone for Pimlico Racecourse, the Preakness itself, the state of Maryland as a whole, the city of Baltimore. I am here with author, freelance writer, racing historian Jennifer Kelly, here to talk a little bit about the Preakness history. So the race itself started back in 1873. Just tell us a little bit about how it came together.
Well, the Preakness itself is named for the very first horse to win the Dinner Party Stakes here at Pimlico in 1870, and that was Preakness, of course. And then about 1873, Governor Odin Bowie, who was the founder of Pimlico, decided he wanted to name a race for Preakness. And so they ran the first 1.5 mile Preakness Stakes in late May 1873 with Survivor winning that one. And then it stayed here at Pimlico until about 1889 when the racetrack, the Maryland Jockey Club lost their financing and couldn't afford the lease on the racetrack, and so they had to let it go.
That's a lot of people don't realize that we're looking at 150 this year, but the race starting in 1873, obviously that math doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And so there were a couple years where it didn't run at all.
Right. It left here in 1889. It ran once in 1890 at Morris Park in New York, which is a long gone racetrack in New York, and then picked up again a few years later at Gravesend Racetrack, which is also another one of those racetracks that doesn't exist anymore. And it was there from 1890 until 1908, I believe. And they ran 15 or 16 editions there, and then in 1909 they brought it back here to Pimlico.
Yeah. So once the race came back here to Maryland, kind of how did it find its footing again? Obviously the Triple Crown came along just a few years after that, where we started having our first horses running in all 3 races. How did that really kind of help propel the Preakness to the status it now is?
Well, they brought the Preakness back here in 1909 because they wanted what they felt like was Maryland's signature stakes race back here. And William P. Riggs and the Maryland Jockey Club worked really hard to rebuild the race and to make it a destination because they had felt like they were getting outpaced by Kentucky, and especially by the Kentucky Derby. So about 1918, they decided to bump the purse up to $15,000. And when they did that, and I know $15,000 doesn't sound like a lot,
but for back then,
that was amazing. And that year in 1918, there were actually 2 runnings of the Preakness that were won by Jack Hare Jr. and War Cloud. And then the following year in 1919, they bumped the purse again to $25,000. And that is when you get our first Triple Crown winner, Sir Barton. Yeah. So this chase for the Triple Crown that we know of is actually fueled by money.
Yeah.
More than anything else.
And fueled by the Preakness. If the Preakness doesn't do that, who knows what ends up becoming of the Triple Crown. Obviously the Derby and the Belmont, getting assisted by that as well. So once the Triple Crown kind of begins there with all the contributions of Sir Barton and War Cloud before him running in all 3 races, how does the race then kind of start to develop as the series develops?
The race grows in prominence when the purse grows. So we go through the 1920s, and you can trace how the purse increases year over year. By 1922, it was up to $50,000 because they'd actually scheduled the Derby and the Preakness on the same day in 1922.
Hard to win, but all 3 in that scenario.
Yeah, it was a quirk of the calendar, and if you want details about that, I can explain that as well. But once they started bumping the purse up more and more, that's when you start seeing the Preakness grow as a destination. But it took Gallant Fox winning in 1930 for people to really latch on to it as a thing. But as early as 1923, we do see the first mentions of the 3 races as our Triple Crown. It just wasn't in widespread use until after Gallant Fox.
Well, the Triple Crown obviously has produced quite a few champions, some big names that have won the Preakness. Think about obviously Secretariat, Seattle Slew. You also have some non-Triple Crown winners that have won this race that were big names. Your Man o' Wars, your Northern Dancers, horses like that. We saw a big span in the 2000s, whereas the Preakness winner was the 3-year-old champion every single year. What is it about this race that's kind of helped lead to that championship success at the end of the year?
It's that question of how fit are you at this point. So, if you win the Derby and then 2 weeks later you win the Preakness, that is a high quality horse. That is an animal that is going to go on to do big things. And so that is why for the longest time, even if we didn't have a Triple Crown winner, which we did not for 37 years, oftentimes the leading 3-year-old of the year would would be the one that would win the Derby and the Preakness, because it is such a big accomplishment to not only be fit to run 10 furlongs on the first Saturday of May, but then to be, fit to run a similar distance just 14 days later. So it speaks to the quality of the horses that run here. That, I'll hear people say that, even if you didn't win the Derby, your horse is still good. And when they come to Preakness, they have the chance to make a step forward and actually make this a stepping stone to another, to winning the Belmont or winning more Grade 1s later in the year. So this is a great test of how fit your horse is at this point in the year.
Because we've seen horses that lost the Derby that came back, win the Preakness, go on to be champions. You think Point Given, a Fleet Alex, horses like that. Looking at Lucky that went on to become, champions at the end of the year. And then on the Philly side as well, Rachel Alexandra. Obviously, that was a pretty big race
Swiss
that she had here as well. Swiss
yeah.
Skydiver. If you win this race as a filly, that's probably a good tell you're going to end up. Tell us a little bit just about the Fillies and the Preakness.
Oh, well, there have been more fillies that have won the Preakness than have won the Derby. We've only had 3 win the Derby: Regret, Winning Colors, and Genuine Risk, but there have been 6 who've won the Preakness, including Swiss Skydiver and Rachel Alexandra, Nellie Morse, Flo Carline, Whimsical, and Rachel Alexandra, which I might have said twice. But, it speaks to the way this is positioned on the calendar, that, people can take a step forward with a filly. Like Rachel won the Kentucky Oaks by 20-something lengths. And then 2 weeks later, Steve Asmussen brings her back here and she wins the Preakness. I mean, that's the fortunate position that the Preakness is in, is that because it is here on the calendar, it is a great opportunity for a developing 3-year-old to really show what they're made of.
And it's interesting you bring up the fact about where it is on the calendar, because that's a hot topic of debate right now. Obviously, the Sovereignty, the Kentucky Derby winner, not coming to the Preakness this year, skipping the race. But we do have Journalism, the runner-up from the Preakness. We have Sandman, who was 7th in the the runner-up from the Derby was Journalism. Hopefully I didn't just doom him in the prediction there. But you've seeing a couple horses coming out of the Derby running back here. I know you've done quite a bit of research. I've seen you posting about the debate of where it is in the timeline of the Triple Crown. Is not something that's new. This is something that's been going on for a long time.
Oh, for pretty much since the Triple Crown as we know it has existed, there has been this debate. When it was on the same day in 1922, the Derby and the Preakness, then they started asking the racetracks to please not schedule them for the same day. Okay. Then it became how much spacing is good, because they wanted the Preakness to run on a certain day and Pimlico's meet, and the Derby to run on that certain day, and Churchill Downs' meet. And then as late as 1955, they complained that 3 weeks, which at that time it was 3 weeks between Derby and Preakness, was actually too long.
See, look at that. That's the complete opposite of today.
You had a California horse. They didn't want to ship the California horse back to California and then ship him back to Maryland. So it's like, well, you need less time between the 2 races so we can stay on the East Coast. And so by 1969, when Majestic Prince won the Derby and then the Preakness, but wasn't originally going to run in the Belmont, it was because his trainer, who was Johnny Longden, who won the Triple Crown on Count Fleet, felt like it wasn't enough time for the horse to recover. And so this debate about the distance, the spacing between the 2 races and the 3, honestly, has been going on pretty much since the beginning. And it speaks to the era that you're in when you hear how people discuss that spacing. So here we're in an era where people like more time between races, whereas back in the 50s or the 60s, they would have been just fine wheeling back in 2 weeks.
Well, you look at, obviously, we've had 13 Triple Crown winners, and several of them had different spacings between their races. You think back, I think Sir Barton was, 4 days between the Derby and the Preakness, which is insane to think about nowadays. But it is one of those topics of debate. I don't know if you have any personal opinions as far as, whether it should move or not, or if you have, any recommendations, if it does move, what you think would work best, anything like that?
My usual answer to this, because I've been asked this before, is
I know you've done a lot of Triple Crown research, so I'm interested on your.
The thing that I land on is not, you can change the spacing of the races. The question is, what else will be affected by that?
Okay.
Because when you start changing things that have been set on a calendar for this long, then you start running into, well, the Haskell is this time at Monmouth, and then the Travers is this time. And it's not just the spacing between the races, it's also the facilities and, the horses themselves. You got to transport people between places. You've got, employees, you've got, thousands of jobs that are all dependent on this. So when you start making decisions about this kind of stuff, it's not just we got to space the Preakness out so that more horses will run. Yes, we want that, but it's also all these other domino effects that happen because you do that. So I'm okay with having those conversations. I just want people to realize that it's bigger than just moving the Preakness 3 weeks or 4 weeks, to like the first weekend in June. It's bigger than that. There's a lot more involved.
Effects.
Yeah, the ripple effects are big, and it affects how you develop your 3-year-old as you move, into the summer stakes like the Haskell and then the Travers, and then we, even Breeders' Cup. Yeah. Because so much of how we prepare horses for their 2-year-old seasons and then into their 3-year-old seasons is influenced by the timing of the Breeders' Cup. So this would be in the same way as you've got people planning post-Derby Preakness campaigns, like how does changing the dates affect what you're going to do later in the year? Yeah. So that's why I'm not averse to moving them, but I'm also a traditionalist, and I will tell you, please don't. But I also know that there's a lot more to think about here than just the spacing between the races.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about change here, potentially. One change that is going to happen. Right now, we're at the stakes barn at Pimlico. Right. The grandstand that's behind this barn, this will be the final one with this grandstand. I know you were just telling me before we started that this is probably the 3rd or 4th iteration of the grandstand right now. Just your thoughts on, kind of this facility, how it's progressed over the years, and what we can look forward to for the future of the Preakness once they do get a new facility here.
I'm really looking forward to what the new Pimlico is going to look like. This racetrack has served its purpose. It has been here for, quite a number of years.
I love it, but it's time for it to go, I think.
It's like you have an old car and you really enjoy it. The car has brought you a lot of, joy and a lot of purpose, but it's starting to run out of parts that you can replace in it. And I think Pimlico, as long as we keep the ground that it's on and the oval stays where it's at, everything else that's around that oval has changed multiple times already. So this change is just another phase in the existence of Pimlico. But as long as that dirt oval stays where it's at, this is still a historic spot, and it is still going to have its share of memories, and so it'll just have its share of memories in a new building.
Well, one of the things that I think we've talked about a lot when it comes to when you look at all the renovations Churchill Downs does, and with Belmont Park under reconstruction right now, and obviously Pimlico about to do it as well. These are the 3 biggest races in the sport. They're the 3 of the most attended races in the sport. Right. For the status of the Preakness, how important is it to have a facility that matches that status?
When I talked to a few people from the Maryland Jockey Club for an article earlier this year, they were talking about the experience of Preakness and, mirroring what Derby is doing to keep the experience as big and as bucket list and as fun as it has been. And so they want this track to match the experience that people are coming here for. And so I think it's really important for Pimlico to do that. I think Pimlico really needs to update and match the energy. Because you're here and I'm here. And we're here for the same reason. We're here because it's historic and it's
historic.
Fantastic.
We love the horses. We love the races.
And, why not build a racetrack that matches the energy that we're bringing in? Why not, build a racetrack that makes people want to come and hang out and spend a whole day and pull up a Blackside Susan and sip on it and go watch some horses run.
Exactly.
And so that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to keep, going for the Super Bowl experience with the Triple Crown, and we're really excited about that.
Awesome. Well, we're excited for Preakness 150 this weekend. I hope you enjoy the races. Thank you so much for taking the time to run through a little Preakness, a little Pimlico history with us here. Where can, I know I'm a big fan of your books about the Triple Crown winners, Sir Barton and the Foxes of Belair.
Yes.
So where can the viewers find you?
I am on most social platforms as the Sir Barton, at the Sir Barton. You can find me on pretty much every social media platform. You can find the books in your favorite bookseller, Amazon or Bookshop, or my publisher, the University Press of Kentucky. And if you want to get an extra special version, which is signed by yours truly, you can reach out to me directly, and I'll be happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time with us here, and enjoy the Preakness.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.